At this time Fëanor, perhaps by foresight, sought how the light of the two trees may be preserved imperishable. So he began a long and secret labor, and he summoned all his lore, his power, and his subtle skill. And at the end of all he made the Silmarils. As three great jewels they were, of unknown substance. Like the crystals of diamonds it appeared, and yet more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils as the body is to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire. And the inner fire of the Silmarils Fëanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of the Varda. And they rejoiced in light, and received it, and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. All who dwelt in Aman were filled with wonder and delight at the work of Fëanor. And Varda hallowed the Silmarils, so that thereafter no mortal flesh, nor hands unclean, nor anything of evil will might touch them, but it was scorched and withered. Then Melkor lusted after the Silmarils, and inflamed by this desire, he sought ever more eagerly to destroy Fëanor and the friendship between the Valar and the Elves. But he hid his purposes with cunning, and nothing of his malice could yet be seen in the form that he wore. Long was he at work, and slow at first, and barren was his labor. But he that sows lies in the end shall not lack of a harvest, and soon he may rest from toil and deed, while others reap and sow in his stead. Now Melkor told many in secret that the Valar held them imprisoned in Valinor, and that they could have held many great lands and kingdoms in the east of Middle-earth. And he also told some in secret of the coming of men. For although the Valar knew full well of mortal men, the elves knew nothing. And Melkor thought that the silence of the Valar may be turned to evil use. And so before the Valar were even aware, the peace of Valinor was poisoned. And the Noldor began to murmur against them, and become filled with pride, so that they forgot that all that they had and learned had come from the Valar. And fiercest of all for the desire of freedom and new realms burned in the heart of Fëanor. And Melkor laughed in his secrecy, for it was to Fëanor that the mark of his lies had been set, for he hated Fëanor above all others, and lusted after the Silmarils, but he could not approach them. For Fëanor began to love the Silmarils with a greedy love, and he began to hoard them, and deny the sight of them to all save his father and 7 sons. Little did he remember that the light within them was not his own making. And there was great unrest in Tirion, and Finwë was troubled, and he called all his chieftains and counselors to his side. But Fingolfin stood before his throne, saying, "King and father, will you do nothing to restrain the pride of our brother, cruel Finwë, called Spirit of Fire all too truly? What right does he have to speak for all our people as if he were king? It was you who bid the Noldor to come to Valinor through the perils of Middle-earth, and here dwell forever. If you do not now repent of it, 2 sons at least you have who will honor and obey your word." But even as Fingolfin spoke, Fëanor strode into the chamber. He was fully armed, his high helm upon his head, and at his side a mighty sword. "So it is even as I guessed," he said. "My half-brother would be before me with my father, in this as in all other matters." Then turning upon Fingolfin, he drew his sword, crying, "Get thee gone, and take thy due place." Fingolfin bowed before Finwë, and without word or glance to Fëanor, he went from the chamber. But Fëanor followed him, and at the door of the king's house he stayed him, and the point of his bright sword he set against Fingolfin's breast. "See, half-brother," he said, "this is sharper than thy tongue. Try once more to usurp my place and the love of my father, Maybe it will rid the Noldor of one who seeks to be the master of thralls. These words were heard by many, for the house of Finwë was in the great square beneath the Mindon. But again Fingolfin made no answer, and passing through the throng in silence, he went to seek Finarfin, his brother. Then the Valar saw the unrest of the Noldor, and had Fëanor brought before them, and questioned him of all he knew. And it was then that the malice of Melkor was laid bare. Straightway Togas left the council to lay hold upon his foe, but Melkor had fled into the shadows. And yet Fëanor was not held guiltless, for he had first broken the peace of Valinor and drawn sword upon his kinsmen. And Mendos spoke to him, saying, If thraldom it be, you cannot escape it, for Manwë is leader of Arda, and not Valinor only. And this deed was unlawful, whether in Valinor or not in Valinor. Therefore this doom is now made. For 12 years you shall leave Tirion where this threat was uttered. In that time take counsel with yourself, and remember who and what you are. But after that time, this matter shall be set in peace and held redressed, if others will release you. Then Fingolfin said, I will release my brother. But Fëanor spoke no word in answer, standing silent before the Valar. Then he turned and left the council, and departed from Valmar. With him into banishment went his 7 sons. Northward in Valinor they made a strong place and a treasury in the hills. There at Formenos a multitude of gems were laid in hoard, weapons also, and the Silmarils were shut in a chamber of iron. Also there came Finwë the king, because of the love that he bore to Fëanor, and Fingolfin ruled the Noldor in Tirion. Thus the lies of Melkor were made true in seeming, though it was Fëanor by his own deeds that had brought this thing to pass, and the bitterness that Melkor had sown endured, and lived still long afterwards, between the sons of Fingolfin and Finarfin. For a time Melkor was not seen again in Valinor, nor was any rumor heard of him, until suddenly he came to Formenos, and spoke with Fëanor before the doors. Friendship he feigned with cunning argument, urging him to fly from the trammels of the Valar. And he said, Behold the truth of all I have spoken, and how you are banished unjustly. But if the heart of Fëanor is yet free and bold as were his words in Tirion, then I will aid him, and bring him far from this narrow land. For am I not Vala also? Yes, and more than those who sit in pride in Valimar. And I have ever been a friend to the Noldor, most skilled and most valiant of the people of Arda. Now Fëanor's heart was still bitter as his humiliation before the Valar. He looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. Melkor, seeing that Fëanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last, Here is a strong place, and well guarded, but think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the realm of the Valar. But his cunning overreached his aim, and his words touched too deep. And Fëanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance, and pierced the cloak of his mind. Then hate overcame Fëanor's fear, and he cursed Melkor, saying, Get you gone from my gate, you jail crow of Mandos. And he shut the doors of his house in the face of the mightiest of all the dwellers in Arda. Then Melkor departed in shame, for he was himself in peril, but his heart was black with anger. And Finwë was filled with great fear, and in haste he sent messengers to Manwë in Valmar. Now it seemed to Manwë that Melkor would escape to his old fortresses in Middle-earth, and the watch was doubled in the north, but to no avail. For Melkor escaped to the south, and he could yet change his form as the other Valar, but this power he was soon to lose forever. And unseen he came to the dark region of Avathar, the land that lay to the south of the Bay of Eldamar, beneath the eastern feet of the Pelori Mountains. And there, Beneath the sheer walls of the mountains and the cold dark sea, Ungoliant had made her abode, and no one knew where she came. Some have said that in ages long before she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda, and some said that she was one of the Maya who was corrupted to his service. But if this was true, she had disowned her master, desiring to be the mistress of her own lusts, taking all things to feed her emptiness. And she fled to the south, and thus she had crept toward the light of the blessed realm, for she hungered for light and hated it. In a ravine she lived, and took shape as a spider of monstrous form. Therefore she sucked up all light that she could find, and spun it forth again in dark nets of strangling gloom, until no light more could come to her abode, and she was famished. But now Melkor came to Avathar and sought her out, and he put on again the form that he had worn as a tyrant of Utumno, a dark lord tall and terrible, and in that form he remained ever after. Melkor with Ungoliant plotted his revenge. But when Ungoliant understood the purpose of Melkor, she was torn between lust and great fear. There, in the black shadows, beyond the sight even of Manwë, and she would not stir from her hiding. Therefore Melkor said to her, "Do as I bid, and if you hunger still when all is done, I will give whatever your lust may demand. Yes, with both hands I will give it." Lightly he made this vow, as he ever did, and thus the great thief set his lure for the lesser. Meanwhile, in Valinor, Manwë decreed that a great feast be held to heal the evil that had arisen among the Noldor, and all were bidden to come to the halls upon Tany-Quetu. There came the Vanyar, and the Noldor of Tirion, and the Maya were gathered together. Only the Teleri beyond the mountains still sang upon the shores of the sea, for the shadow had not touched them, as of yet. One thing only marred the design of Manwë. Fëanor came, indeed, for him alone Manwë had commanded to come, but Finwë came not, nor any others of the Noldor of Formonos. For said Finwë, "While the ban lasts upon Fëanor my son, that he may not go to Tirion, I hold myself unkinged, and I will not meet my people." And Fëanor came not in raiment of festival, and he wore no ornament, neither silver nor gold nor any gem, and he denied the sight of the Silmarils to the Vala and the Eldar, and left them locked in Fornos in their chamber of iron. Nonetheless, he met Fingolfin before the throne of Manwë, and was reconciled in word. But in that very hour Melkor and Ungoliant came hastening over the fields of Valinor, and they came before the green mound Elzelahar. Then the unlight of Ungoliant rose up even to the roots of the trees, and Melkor sprang upon the mound, and with his black spear he smote each tree to its core, wounding them deep, and their sap poured forth as it were their blood, and was spilled upon the ground. But Ungoliant sucked it up, and going then from tree to tree she set her black beak to their wounds, till they were drained. The poison of death that was in her went into their tissues and withered them, root, branch, and leaf, and they died. And still she thirsted, and going to the wells of Varda she drank them dry, but Ungoliant belched forth black vapors as she drank, and swelled to a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor himself was afraid. And so darkness fell upon Valinor, and the light failed. But the darkness that followed was more than loss of light. In that hour was made a darkness that seemed not lack, but a thing with being of its own. And all the people of Valinor cried in anguish, believing that they had fully drank the cups of woe that Melkor had poured for them. And yet it was not to be.